The man who thought himself king.
Some haunted by the ghosts they have deposed, some poisoned by their wives, some sleeping killed.
Scene 2, Act 3, Richard II, 629 AS. The rock upon which the keep of his ancestors was firm as the man himself was, and as proud as any Khalid. Every inch and fragment of the stone was part of the earth, and had been there for millennia since time immemorial. There were legends, certainly, that a great elvish prince had raised it up in a primordial age, and did so to build his own keep, as he had done at Sigane. But Ringan had never believed in such stories. It was not that he did not believe in anything outside of himself. By no means was he a man without a certain penchant for faith. A frequent visitor of a myriad of temples to more than a half-dozen gods, he had given over more wealth than his brother had to the temple. Elves were creatures purely of myth and legend to his mind, and it annoyed him that others did not think of them as mere fancy and myth.
False superstitions are a poison for the spirit,
his brother Domhnall had often chanted, as he had plenty of other proverbs. The fact that his brother's former absolver, Brother Freyn, intended to copy them all down in a tome from where he had been imprisoned in Claimcraig Abbey amused him. 2 years, a part of him mused with no small amount of sorrow. 2 years since he had lost his brother. His older brother had always been his protector, his most ardent defender, and greatest patron.
Come back to bed.
Aina whispered seductively from behind him, with only a thin sheet to protect her modesty. Continuing to stare out the large window, it gave a splendid view out into the vast Ilean fields that stretched far to the north and west of the castle. To the south lay the Firth of the Thurn. Ringan smiled at the sound of the distant gulls and crashing waves. Aye, the grief at the loss of his elder brother, and also that of his son, Kenned, had been so difficult. And yet, thanks to Aina, he now had 3 daughters, and the possibility of a 4th son. Pregnant at the time of the massacre with their twins, she had given birth shortly thereafter, only to within 4 moons to be with child again. Though she was the mother of a number of children, she showed little of this on her figure.
Nay, there's far too much to do, especially in regard to the news surrounding the battles west of the Highlands.
Ringan turned away reluctantly from her to continue to stare, if only briefly, outside for a little longer. The seas were raging as always, the skies threatening another storm as always, and the courtyard of the castle was lovely as always. Several of the children he could see were hurrying out to play about under the watchful supervision of Walton, the head of the men-at-arms. Thereupon the rock on which the keep was built, amongst the young boys were a number of the sons and brothers of the enemies of Ringan, and some of his allies. None of them were wholly safe, for none knew upon whose head might befall the wrath of the new High King. Beyond the castle walls was the city of Claimcraig, one that consisted of 2,000 or so souls. The village had grown from several hundred to several thousand, and thus into one of the largest cities in the kingdom of the Khalids. It was the dream of Ringan that one day it might grow into the principal center of the realm. This was to be his true legacy, he told himself. Ringan's attention was torn from his internal musings by the sudden sight of a dark figure on the horizon. This person was slightly built, and but a speck from where he stood. However, the way in which he moved brought to mind a wolf or a dog.
Ringan!
Aina called, pulling his attention from the window, now fully dressed. She studied him closely.
Why are you not listening to me?
It was nothing. My heart, nothing,
he replied uneasily, preferring to turn his mind to other matters.
What is it that is planned for this day?
No need to think on black specks in the distance, he told himself, not when there was such happiness at hand.
The Mormaer of Norroak has begun to advance about the Highlands to strike at Rybert, hoping to corner him against them as he sweeps just south of Luthane's forces.
The messenger from Norroak explained, having carried with him the knowledge of Rory's stratagems against the nephew of the High King. The tactics utilized by the Northern Laird brought a frown to Padraig's lips. His father did not blame him for his doubt, even as he found himself nodding his head in satisfaction.
Good, good. Convey to him my approval.
What? How could you approve of such a strategy, father?
The Crown Prince demanded of his sire, confused.
Because, my son, in war, the greater the gamble, the greater the victory.
Ringan said quietly.
Rory has never failed, and has established himself as a man of some talent in war.
There was more that Padraig would have liked to say. This much he could tell with a single glance. After a brief, exasperated exchange with his lovely queen, the monarch chose to offer up, as was proper compensation, along with the hospitality to the messenger, for such good tidings.
You may stay here as long as you like. Doubtless we shall soon hear of thy lad's victory before long.
The man thanked him and was gone at once to the kitchens to accept some food before he went off to rest. Turning to his chamberlain, Dougal, Ringan asked of him,
What else is there, Dughall? I wish to hunt and should hope there is little else to do for the moment.
There is the matter of the dispensing of justice.
The chamberlain stuttered. He had served under Domhnall in the past, so that he always assumed everyone would be as keenly interested in justice as the old king had been.
Bah, such matters should ought to be seen to by my sons. Wait, where is Dibby?
Ringan asked impatiently.
He must have had other matters to attend to.
Quoth Aina in a falsely nervous voice, pretending to care one whit about what her stepson was up to. Fixing a dark look upon her, if briefly so, Podrick would answer,
I will go look for him if it might please you, father.
What indeed?
Ringland replied sharply, only to, for the moment, banish the thought of his youngest son from his mind.
Is there aught else?
Aye,
said the chamberlain reluctantly, motioning from the rear of the crowd for one man to advance.
the seers of whom we spoke some time ago has arrived after a long journey. I took the liberties after we spoke of having him invited here so that he might predict thy fortunes.
The seer who stepped forward did so hesitantly, with wide blue eyes. He glanced about, evidently a little alarmed and overwhelmed by the magnificence displayed by the monarch in his court. Tall, perhaps taller than the monarch himself, he was slightly built, with a slightly pointed chin, perpetually pursed lips, and thick brown brows, the same color as his thinning hair and short mustache. Dressed in monastic robes, it was evident by his habit, as much as by the pendant of the mountain sacred to Tenjin, the Lord of Knowledge, that he was a man of the faith.
Welcome, seer.
Greeted Aina at her warmest, always keen to hear of holy men and seers, being of a rather superstitious nature.
Lady,
The man said with a deep bow. Middle-aged, he was easily her senior by 10 years or more.
it is an honor to be here, though I am quite bewildered at such an invitation.
His accent was ever so slight, and there was something to his voice, so that Ringan knew at once that he was of Nordic descent.
You are a Northman.
Near to being one, thanks to my mother.
The seer replied with a slight smile.
My father, bless his memory and spirit that rest in Gimli, he was of the Western Isles, namely the Isle of Canute, just to the southwest of the great Isle of Kol.
Ringan smiled. He liked the monk's humility and felt that more monks ought to demonstrate the same virtue.
And how do you find the East? Quite different from your overly austere, monastic, and impoverished isles, are they not?
The slight smile that decorated the seer's lips vanished, to be replaced by a slight scowl, so that the monarch knew he had insulted the man before him.
I have not found them terribly poor. We are rich in fish and faith, which are all that man needs.
I suppose.
The monarch grunted, of a different mind. Disdainful of the taste of fish, he could not imagine what was in the seer's mind.
Brother Adam, I did not bring you hither to speak of the West Isles, but of the future of my reign.
I should think the West Isles are of the utmost importance to you, for it was from them that thy ancestors sprung from.
Adam grunted stiffly, beginning to annoy the monarch in turn. Sensing that his liege lord was losing any semblance of liking for the presumptuous holy man, Dougal the chamberlain intervened to whisper in the king's ear. Reluctantly he did as asked, but only after Aina had joined their servant in begging him to be kinder to their guest.
I suppose.
An awkward silence followed, one in which the monk stared at with no small amount of hostility by the court, swallowed his own pride, and bowed before him.
Forgive my rudeness, O king. I am a prideful man who loves his home overmuch.
Never a vice, in my view.
Ringan replied, softening a little, for he loved his own home also. Keen to change the topic, he asked him,
May I ask you to give me insight into what the future holds for me?
Adam hesitated. He turned to Dougal as though appealing to him for aid, to which he found little in the way of quarter. The Chamberlain pleaded with his eyes and nodded towards the monarch, which pulled a heavy sigh from the new arrival.
Very well, if such is your desire, sire.
Adam consented, if against his will. A moment of silence followed before he asked,
Your hands, sire, I have need of them.
Why do you ask?
Ringan wondered, stepping thither to stand closer to him, confused by the request.
I have found that I shan't predict anyone's future without first touching them.
Adam replied quietly.
It is the nature of how my particular gifts have always been.
How odd,
said Ringan, without taking too much of an interest in this fact, thinking it a mere curiosity. He shivered.
Her hands are as cold as ice.
The eyes of Brother Adam, the moment he held the ruler's hands in his own, took a rather darker than almost silver shade, if briefly so. The light in question disappeared as swiftly as it had appeared. It was thence that Adam made his prophecy, his eyes dreamy and distant. Podrick searched all throughout the castle, beginning first with the stables and the courtyard, his brother's favorite places. A great lover of horses, Dweeb, in their youth, had never been very far from their war steeds, and since he had come of age, he had never been one to miss a day of sword practice. Startled to discover that his brother was not in these favorite locations, Podrick decided to search about the kitchens and the servants' quarters. Certain that his brother had a lover amongst the servants of the castle, Podrick found no hint of his brother's presence in their midst.
Has anyone seen him?
He was to ask of one servant.
Nay, my prince.
The old man replied earnestly.
Maybe you ought to investigate the village tavern.
The tavern?
Podrick asked of the servant he had discovered, rushing in between two of the kitchens and the mead hall. The old man soon departed to go return to his work, with the prince brooding about the knowing look in his eyes and the pity there also. Podrick had hated to see a servant look at him in that manner, yet what worried him most was what it could mean, and the instinctive certainty that came to him at once regarding Dweeb. Dweeb was exactly where he was said to be found, in the most run-down tavern in the local city at the base of the hill upon which sat the castle. The tavern was a place by the name of the Nocturnal Mug. It was notable for the image of the downturned mug on the sign just outside it, with the thatch roof looking as though it might collapse at any moment. Wrinkling his nose in disgust at the stench that was to be found inside the pub, Podrick found his brother by the bar in the midst of downing a large mug of ale under the watchful eye of the owner.
Should he take once more to violence, as he did the prior night, it shall be to you to stop him, O prince.
The owner of the tavern grunted, before he departed to attend to other matters. Newcomers had arrived from abroad, with the master of the pub concerned because he had sent away the stable hand for the day since the youth was sick, and thus had the duty to stable their horses himself. Ignoring the other man and the travelers, Podrick turned once more to his brother to inform him.
Our father has called for you, Doob.
Dweeb gave no indication that he heard him.
Doob, come along.
His brother threw back his chair, his hand going to the pommel of his sword when he moved to seize his arm.
Dinna touch me, brother, lest you wish to wear a second smile.
Startled by the threat, Podrick stared at him in alarm. Never before had his brother threatened him. Such was the loyalty he felt for him, and such the brotherly love that ran through the two of them. The two shared contempt for Dumnall for his slowness, and their misery with their father's choice to abandon Kinned, so that they had never clashed, if at all.
Doob, are you drunk?
He said soothingly. Leave me alone.
What has come over you?
At this question, Dweeb shuddered and shrunk inwardly so that he fell upon the nearest chair, nursing his mug once more.
We are doomed, Podrick, doomed.
What is this talk of doom?
Padraig demanded, still bewildered by the change that had suddenly come over his brother.
2 years ago, he abandoned our brother, choosing to march upon this very fort and put the heads of our kin on their own pikes.
Dweeb groaned, staring into his ale with a melancholy and despair that his brother was only beginning to comprehend.
Padraig, I fear what this means for us.
What are you jabbering about? What meaning?
Brother, I do not think we will survive with our souls intact.
Dweeb said savagely, at last meeting the gaze of his brother. A part of Padraig quailed and wished to shrink from the dark gaze that was leveled at him. Another, though, the part of him that was royal and proud to be Tanist of Caledonia, would not allow him, nor would he stomach such weakness from his sibling.
Enough of such talk. Now come along.
Where to? It matters not.
Dweeb soaked into his mug, which was almost empty.
The castle. Where else? Come along, you blubbering fool, lest I tell our father you have disgraced the memory of our beloved mother once more.
Padraig roared, not knowing how else to get his brother on his feet, frightened to leave the youngest of the McRingans alone in such a state. Dweeb, for his part at last, pulled himself from the mire where his soul had fallen to, and protested such a thing.
I would never disgrace mother. It was father who disgraced her by winning that harlot within a month of her passing.
Then say so to him, rather than sulking and crying into thy cups.
This was the last word that was spoken between them over this matter, for Dweeb was in no condition to resist his elder sibling, drunk as he was. The man did not sober up until he had arrived within their father's estate. There they found the castle in a cacophony of noise, movement, and the tension as high as it had been a stormy night 2 years ago.
What has happened?
Dweeb wondered, speculatively to himself.
I do not know.
Padraig responded, ere he stopped one guard who only said to them to go to their father.
Orders are that you are to be sent to him directly.
Mystified, the princes did as bidden and went to their sire's chambers, where they found him pacing the floor. Startled to find him alone and in such a state, Padraig looked about the richly decorated interior and asked curiously, as the lady in question was rarely if ever to be separated from their father,
Where is the queen?
In her own chambers.
Ringan spat bitterly.
She fainted and is of need of care.
Neither Dweeb nor Padraig reacted, for neither of them much cared for their new stepmother, who was once wed to their cousin. The former, though, asked in a careful tone that hardly slurred,
She fainted. I always thought she was of the sort of disposition not to give in to such feminine weakness.
We now know that she is.
Ringan grumbled, only to begin pacing the floor.
And it is no thanks to you that I had to contend with that an utter humiliation earlier.
What humiliation?
The two brothers said together after exchanged glances from the corner of their eyes.
What humiliation? What's humiliation, you say? What a thing to say,
growled their father, beside himself with rage, as though he might well throw one of the vases or water bowls on the nightstand by his bed at them. It would not have been the first time he had done so.
That blasted monk had the temerity to blaspheme against my crown.
What?
What did he say, father?
Padraig asked, though he was beginning to have an idea of what it might be.
Baseless accusations are the vilest sought before my court, before the most leal of Mormoners and lairds and their ladies.
Ringan continued to rage.
He said that I had murdered not only thy uncle, my brother, with my abandonment of him and your cousins. There was more. Worst of all, he preyed upon the queen's superstitions to suggest that the ghosts of my victims could be seen everywhere about me.
The revelation was so ridiculous that Padraig burst into involuntary laughter. His chortles, though, were cut short when he saw the glare the other two men in the bedchambers sent his way.
Why do you snigger, my child?
Ringan asked of him in a low, menacing voice.
Do not tell me you believe him.
His heir asked incredulously, only to pause when he saw the simmering anger beneath the hardened surface that had always covered his father's exterior lair.
Never you mind what I believe. I said we were not to be disturbed,
Ringan retorted, shifting his gaze to just past his two sons. Both of them turned to glance at who he might have been speaking. No one was there. Startled, they turned to correct their father, certain that there had to be an explanation for this odd remark on his part. Ringan, for his part, was not yet finished with speaking to empty air.
Who you think you are to interrupt me when I'm speaking with my sons?
His demand was met with no answer.
Father, to whom do you speak?
Podrick demanded impatiently of his father, a hint of confusion in his voice.
There's a lad just behind you and your brother,
Said the monarch irritably.
There is no lad.
This time it was Duib who spoke up, his words slurring ever so slightly. At this, Ringan's attention was torn away from the lad he had thought he had seen, so that he focused his attention once more on the youngest of his legitimate sons.
Away with you, Dupe. I've had enough of thy poor comportment, and I faith you stink. Go wash the stench of the cheap ale you love so much.
Duib, embarrassed, sniffed at himself only to grimace, realizing his father was right. He did indeed stink. Turning away, he moved to leave the bedchambers alongside the eldest of Ringan's sons. The two had just made it out of the room when the elder of the two stopped, if briefly so, to scold the guards at the door. They were interrupted by a sudden scream from within the king's bedchambers. It cut through the night as a knife might through flesh, or a flame through the darkness of the darkest of evenings. All four men tore their way through the doorway to discover their monarch had fallen by the bed and scurried away from the door, screaming all the while he did so.
My liege, what has happened?
Father, are you well?
Duib asked foolishly in turn, leaping across the room, his hand on the pommel of his sword, utterly sober, one heartbeat to the next. Podrick, for his part, asked,
Father, why did you scream?
It is Sinead. Do you not see him?
Ringan burst out, jabbing a finger into the air, in the direction of the empty air over the shoulders of one of the guards and Duib. Everyone stared at him in astonishment. They knew not what to say to him, for none of them could see the figure he pointed to. When the lot of them sought to comfort him, or to otherwise explain to him that there was nobody present there with them, he rebuffed them.
He is there. I can see him.
Ringan insisted stubbornly.
I see him as surely as I see you, Podrick, or you, Dupe.
But Kined died 2 years ago. We all saw what those beastly Strathclydemen did to his head.
Duib objected at once, adding for good measure,
Why, it was you yourself, father, who cut the pole upon which it had been stuck and had his head cremated.
The reasonable tone of the youngest of the sons of the king might have soothed another man, but not one such as him, not in the mood he was at present.
He is there.
Shooting a helpless glance to his brother for aid, Duib could no more fight than he could change water into fire or move the earth itself beneath their feet. Of a similar mind as him, Podrick hissed at their father.
Father, you always preach of how we must maintain our dignity lest we appear lesser than we are. Henceforth, you must do the same, for you are disgracing yourself before a number of your guards.
Far from paying heed to his words, Ringan sought one last time to convince them of the veracity of his claims.
But he is standing right there. You must see him.
Long after Podrick had left in a huff of frustration, Duib had wandered away to stand guard outside. The eldest of the McRingans did so, visibly disappointed by his father's behavior and rejection of him, with the two guards sitting with him next to the door. This left Ringan alone in his bedchambers for the night, confused as to why his sons, of all people, would not believe him when he told him he could see their half-brother. He spent the night without sleeping at all. Staring at him with visible disappointment and betrayal, Kined's expression showed little in the way of the warmth and admiration he had always felt for his father.
Go away. Go away.
Ringan hissed throughout the night each time he spoke, thus adding to the visible pain on the face of his son. By the time the rooster crowed, the High King was grateful to be out of his chambers. What best pleased him was that his son did not follow him, so that he had peace throughout the day. Aina still felt that he had overreacted by having Adam imprisoned for his terrible prophecy and recounting of what had happened in the past. This in spite of how she continued to feel resentful of the accusations against them.
We cannot imprison Adam without drawing criticism for the act.
She complained, while the family tore into their meal of boar meat that had been placed over a spit but a short time before.
Why care for what others say? We have swords aplenty to silence them.
Retorted her husband wearily.
And once Norak hews down the new mourner of Luthane and Kittil is removed from Bardock, we will be supreme in the kingdom as we were in the days of my brother.
Podrick and Duib nodded their heads, if absent-mindedly, whereas Domhnall stared down at his meal, his wife, Buadich, irritated by his poor eating habits. Her disapproval, mingled with exasperation, was short-lived, as she picked at her own plate with short, irritated gestures. To her own size were the king's youngest children, those born from Aina, the daughters whom he had come to cherish far more than his sons. Let us hope, he mused to himself, that they will not be the wastrels and fools that my sons are. So that the warrior king returned his attention to his good daughter Buadich. Indifferent towards Eilith's gestures, Ringan addressed his attention in the direction of the slowest of his sons.
And what say you, Domhnall?
The eldest and youngest of his sons shifted impatiently, visibly bemused by his addressing their brother, while Buadich looked, for the first time since Ringan had met her, pleased.
Pardon, father?
What do you think of our present situation?
Ringan demanded with exaggerated patience.
Of our present difficulties with Luthane and Bardock?
I should think it might not be best to rely upon the rook unless we wed one of our good cousins or sons when they come of age to one of Rory's sisters.
Domhnall suggested, slowly blinking for several minutes.
Oh, brilliant, Faith. How wonderful to hear such sagely counsel.
Duib exclaimed, exasperated, throwing his hands in the air.
Mind thy tongue.
Buadich growled, always swift to defend her husband.
It was your high king and father who asked for his view, and he has given it.
Forgive my harsh words, then. I simply cannot believe we've sunk so low as to consider the words of a half-wit.
Snapped Duib with equal venom, meeting her disdainful stare with equanimity.
He is not a half-wit.
She defended, with far more passion than even Ringan expected from the young woman. It was in this moment he began to reevaluate his brother's choice of her for his son's bride. Before Duib could interrupt her once more, Ringan intervened, saying to them,
That is quite enough of the two of you. I did ask Domhnall his thoughts, and now ask you all what is to be done with Kittil.
There was silence, until Domhnall, encouraged by the sudden openness of his father towards his thoughts, remarked,
Mahat, we could make peace.
Taking it upon himself to question the middle brother harshly in place of the youngest, Podrick stared at his brother with visible irritation.
Kittil believes himself to be the rightful heir to the throne.
A foolish stance on his part.
Aina grumbled scornfully.
Indeed, but he believes it to be so.
Enough of his folly.
Ringan growled, turning his mind away from Kettle and from his family, grateful for Dougal's sudden arrival in the feast hall.
It would appear that Dougal has some warnings of some great plight for us.
Nothing quite so dire, my liege.
Dougal murmured unhappily. Once he stood before his liege, he fell to his knees to plead with him.
Will you not spare Adam thy displeasure, my lord? He is beyond culpability, and is not always aware of all that passes his lips when he is gripped by one of his prophecies.
This was not what the king had expected from his chamberlain. At once, filled with annoyance and anger towards the former favorite of his brother, Ringan was to turn away from him at once. Raising his nose as he did so, he said unto the older man,
Why should I forgive he who proclaimed his high king to be cursed? Am I not the voice of Scotcha and Zu throughout the lands of the Khalids?
To these words Dougal said nothing. Despairing, he fell to weeping pitifully, begging in between his sobs. As he turned away, the stomach of the monarch fell when he saw a new figure appear within the feast hall. Assuming a seat next to Duib, Kinned glared at his father. In the days to come, Ringan attempted to adapt himself to the return of his youngest son. It was not impossible, he eventually came to realize, in spite of how troubling it was to have his deceased child trailing after him everywhere. It was as the anniversary of the day of his brother's birthday that Ringan quite at some point forgot about him from time to time. Such was the preoccupation that took him over, as he had made an effort to ensure that this particular anniversary was celebrated in previous years. Troubled by the anniversary, Aina was to propose,
Why must we celebrate
celebrate this day once more. It is such a nuisance to celebrate it, then to have a day of mourning for Domhnall's passing 20 days after, followed by the celebration a month later of our union and coronation.
Tradition must be observed, especially if we are to ingrain ourselves on the hearts of your subjects,
quoth Ringan at once.
Love of a people must become habit, lest they remember my sins, as some call some of my past actions.
On this day, he was pleased to notice that Kinned had disappeared. This was a relief, as it was an auspicious day, one that he would require all his wits for, and was ready to greet with considerable enthusiasm. The day was one which involved several games of different sorts. There were archery contests, javelin throwing ones, the discus, and the marathon from Segane to Clamcraig, and of course, duels. This last contest was Ringan's favorite, and was one that Duib used to win more often than not in years past. This year saw the archery contest presided over by Padrig, the archery victory going to the son of a cloth merchant, to the bewilderment of a great many. The youth in question was one who swept the victory and was offered a position on Padrig's guard, a position which he refused, to the disappointment of the prince. The rest of the victories went to a number of guards, the same ones who had won the previous year, so Ringan felt a considerable amount of satisfaction at this knowledge. It pleased him greatly to think that he had none save the finest guarding him and his kinsmen. What truly stunned him, though, was when the duels ended. Beginning 4 days after the birth date of his late brother, this celebration was the grandest and most anticipated. It was always something that the region of Segane, as most still called the region, awaited eagerly. Modeled after the jousts of the distant mainland where the 12 kingdoms dwelt, it was a contest that the proud father had noticed since first established in Domhnall's reign, always saw Duib as the victor. This year, though, did not see Duib win the contest, but an unknown man from the lands of Strothairn in the south. The man in question was a lowly sellsword. After he had beaten down the prince and made him surrender, he proclaimed to the monarch before the whole of the gathered village,
I proclaim this victory in the name of me, Laird Domhnall the Good.
His statement made Ringan clench his fists.
We recognize thy courage and thy strength, and the honor you have done to Domhnall cannot be measured in words.
Aina proclaimed when she took notice of how her husband had turned red-faced in response to the words of the peasant. The man who stood over the defeated Duib bowed before her and before the whole of the village and aided his defeated foe to his feet. The humiliation was almost too much for the ruler to bear.
To have Duib defeated by some gutter snipe, some low-born whelp who proclaims of all names of Domhnall.
Ringan raged later in the confines of their chambers, pacing the floor as he was wont to do.
And for you to recognize him as champion, and to pass along to him the trophy, was all the worst.
Think of my shame,
snorted Aina as she climbed into bed, exasperated by his continuous pacing and raging about Duib's loss.
And you rewarded him.
Enough of that, my love. We had to. It's a contest, after all.
Aina grunted, losing patience, wherefore she asked of him,
Do you intend to join me tonight or not?
I should think not.
Ringan snapped before he could restrain himself. When he saw how she intended to leave, he swallowed his temper.
Fine, I will, though we shall discuss this once more on the morrow.
Aina let slip a frustrated sigh, hardly enthusiastic for this promise of a further argument, when all she wished was to let the matter rest. Hurrying over to join her in the bed, keen to make love to her for the first time in some time, it was when he had positioned himself above her, moving gingerly out of respect for her pregnancy, that he glanced to one side, keen not to fall over off the bed. It was at that moment that he was startled to discover someone standing over him. A sharp cry escaped his lips. Along with an order for the man to be gone from his presence. It was then that he took notice of the figure that loomed over him. It was Neokal. Recognizing the eldest of his elder brother's sons, he could only gape at the figure. His gaze was inevitably drawn to the next figure, which was David, the second of the illegitimate sons. Thence appeared the illegitimate son of Domhnall. The youngest of those present was Kinned, who had returned to stand on the opposite side of the bed from that of Neokal. His expression had by this time shifted to one of utmost contempt rather than one of simple sorrow. Ringan gaped at them, looking from one to another.
Ringin, what is it? Will you not begin?
Aina asked of him, confused as to why he had paused above her.
Ina, they are here.
He whispered to her, trembling with fear and apprehension.
Domhnall's sons are all about us.
Be serious, Ringin.
Aina said after a moment of glancing about them, confused only to not see what it was that had him so utterly terrified.
I am, but there they are. They are here. How can you not see them?
Ringan hissed at her, unable to understand for one long moment that she could not see those who haunted him so fervently. In spite of his horror, there was a moment of silence, wherefore he came to the realization that he truly was alone in being able to see his deceased nephews and son. The latter, who had changed since the last he had seen him, he mused distractedly. Later that night, after Aina had fallen asleep by his side, he was to stare all about him as he saw not only Kinned and his nephews join him, but the youngest of Domhnall's sons. The youngest of his nephews, the ferocious Raybert, who had become the Mormaer of Luthane, appeared from within the shadows of the bedchambers. This last appearance horrified him in particular, for he felt certain that the youth had appeared before him to lay claim to the throne. This was not to be the last of the incidences that haunted Ringan. Quite why he had begun to be haunted in so blatant a manner by the dead was beyond him. It was far, far too much to his mind, preferring to sleep in his wife's chambers with her for a time until, at last, the specters began to follow him there, much to his chagrin. Such was his distraction that he began to spend more and more of his time at night in the bedchambers of Alice, his mistress. One of the maids she had caught his eye nigh on a year before. Sweet-natured, pretty, she alone was willing to live in and clean the high tower of the castle. Most of the servants believed it to be haunted, and thus had been more than happy when she had taken up the occupancy of the tower. Always full of gossip, Ringan had, in spite of his attraction to her, preferred to spend ever more time with Aina, to her, these past months.
I knew you would return to me,
his mistress said with an air of gloating.
Do not think too much of it lest your own charms, and rather more than this is the only place where I may sleep peacefully,
replied the monarch sleepily that night, resolved to have even a few hours of rest. This offended the maid, though she did not show it. It happened that she was of a cleverer nature than Aina, for she did not make as great a show of displeasure as might have the queen. There was, however, one issue she took definitive umbrage with.
Why is it that you join me, only to sleep most nights rather than to make love to me?
What?
He asked, and when she repeated the query, he hesitated to answer. The last time he had answered such a question, he had been treated as a madman.
Oh well, it is just so peaceful here. I will please you if you wish on the morrow.
By this time, he was dozing. It happened that Alice was quite dissatisfied by this. She was to grumble, if with a little irony in her voice.
I wonder what others might say were they to know the only place you find peace is in the very tower where your wife was said to have passed.
This served to awaken him at once, awaken him and his full fury as he abruptly sat up with a glower that could have pierced the darkest of night.
What? What did you say?
He demanded of her, brows knitting together in wrath as he loomed over the frightened maidservant who had been resting next to him on the small bed.
Did I say you may speak of her to me? Why would you mention her?
She pleaded, frightened by his sudden burst of temper, not that this allayed his ill mood. Continuing to glare at her, he was tempted to send her away and take the whole of the bed for himself. But the temptation passed as swiftly as it had come upon him, so that he was to, in place of doing so, turn away from her. This proved to be a mistake. There, sitting by the bed, with her head twisted to one side at an awkward angle, was Sorsha, his first wife. Ringan stared for some time open-mouthed at her. He could remember her well. Once beautiful, she had become fat in her older years, and had given away to gluttony and to gossip, and had made the days long. In time, he had grown to resent his brother's choice of a bride for him, so that it was in part the reason he had seduced Aina away from Neokal. Sorsha was a wicked creature, one who had gossiped and treated all about about her as poorly as Aina, saving perhaps her own sons. Ringan could, however, recall the times that he had been made to endure her glaring stare, more times than he cared to count. What he could not recall quite so vividly was the hurt, dead look that she was giving him at that moment. Her dark eyes cast little in the way of light, and were so deadened as to leave him wordless and feeling some measure of guilt, if only briefly so.
Why do you haunt me? Stay away! I did nothing wrong!
He said to himself, unable to understand quite why it was that she had come to him. The glare only worsened, and the pain in her eyes left him all the more stunned, even as her head moved, so that the awkward angle it was held at was all the more blatant. The rest of the night passed quietly. In the morning, Ringan pulled himself from the bed and withdrew back to his own chambers as he had done before. This time, though, there was little in the way of peace or joy to his step. It was instead heavy and wearier than before. The news that Norok's banners were within sight of the castle reached Ringan's ears via his son Podrick, who had begun to step increasingly into the role of king left by his father. The effect it had upon all the castle and the village was one of excitement and relief. It had been some time since people had had any joyous news or been visited by one of the major vassals. Some, though, took it as an ill omen and were hardly pleased when they saw the garish trophy that the Mormaer carried with him, the head of Raybert. Raybert was once a popular figure in these parts, especially among the women who had thought him dashing, heroic, and chivalrous. Raybert was a figure of song and fantasy for them, so that none greeted the formidable Rory of Norok with cheers. Glancing about him, along with those guards who had accompanied him southeast, the young Mormaer was visibly troubled by the rejection of the local people of Claimcraig, muttering about this to some of his advisors, who for their own part were to grumble and advise him not to misbehave himself.
No matter how hostile they are, my laird, we have not the numbers to offend them and fend them from you,
they told him sharply, though he took offense at the lack of enthusiasm the people felt for him. Reluctantly, he did as bidden by them, delivering the grisly head of Raybert to the mayor of the city and High King. The former was to greet the trophy with visible unhappiness, where the latter did so with the opposite expression on his face.
'Twas little more than my duty, my laird,
said Rory, as he bowed his head to his liege, who took up the trophy and the spear from him. Ringan was to nod his head approvingly at these words. How could he not? The youth had shown himself leal and capable, pondering how best to use him to conquer the indomitable Kettle and the lands of Bardroch. He would have to begin construction of a small fleet to take the Isle of Logisty, where Isla and her newborn niece lived. So long as it remained outside of his control, it would continue to prove itself a thorn in his side. His mind on the matter of the eastern lands of his kingdom, the ruler guided his newly arrived guests through his castle.
Let us away to the throne room, where we will do things in the proper fashion. Wherefore, I intend to have a feast in your honor, my laird,
Ringan declared with all the enthusiasm and eagerness that one can summon for such an occasion.
Thank you, laird. I shall enjoy it,
Rory said, relieved and grateful.
No, nonsense,
said Ringan with a chortle.
I must confess that you have brought me the greatest joy I have felt in months.
Nodding his head, Rory followed him with nary another word. Falling into step alongside Podrick just behind their liege laird, the warrior Mormaer murmured to him.
It appears to me that much has changed in the time since I was here last.
How so, my laird?
I visited a year prior to the death of Domhnall, and there were no ravens atop the Keats Peaks as there are today,
said the nobleman, pointing to the top of the building.
You need not worry,
retorted Podrick, evenly keen to smooth over what concerns the noble had over such an omen.
They occasionally visit and should fly off shortly after the storm begins. And make no mistake, there will be a storm.
I either never heard for very long,
Dweeb said in agreement, if reluctantly so when prompted with a glance from his oldest brother. Rory murmured, unconvinced by their words, trailing after them, still affected by the omens he had seen thus far. Namely, the maddened crowds, the heavy storm clouds combined with the squawking ravens atop the castle were what bothered him.
I should think it best only to stay a short time.
The brothers exchanged a glance, this one a slightly exasperated one. It happened that as they entered the mead hall, it was there that the throne was to be found, along with an array of banquet tables. Tables they were all intent upon guiding the Mormaer to, along with his followers, in order to properly honor them. The first hint that something had gone awry took place when Ringan came to a stop, a short distance from the throne, where he was expected to seat himself. Raising a hand to point in the direction of the great marble chair, Ringan demanded of those around him,
Who's that man?
Pardon? What do you mean, father?
Duib asked of their father.
There is no man present, my dearest one.
Aina added from where she stood next to her husband, no less confused by his words than his son was.
But there is.
Ringan persisted desperately.
He sits there upon my throne, as though it be his by right.
All followed his finger with their eyes, yet none could see what it was that troubled the mighty patriarch of the royal line. Barren as a desert might have been, the throne was empty, with all present looking from it to the ruler, who continued to jab at the air with his chiefmost finger. Mad he seemed. Let it not be said that Ringan was blind to their doubt, or deaf to the whispers of all those who surrounded him. To his eyes, there was the most dreadful of figures to be seen, seated there upon his throne. This figure, which horrified him so, was a figure who had stridden from the mead hall from the right-hand side of the hall.
I have not lost my wits.
Ringan hissed, desperate to convince all around him of the veracity of this statement, and desperate beyond all reason to do so.
It is he! It is Domhnall, back from the grave, and he is seated there upon my throne.
At these words, the expression of the old king changed. Before that moment, his disposition could best be described as somber, yet now it shifted to a more melancholic air. The pall cast over his face was one that remained present over the next moments, as Ringan gave way to ever greater madness. Maddened by the disbelief and doubt that clouded every face around him, Ringan was to cry out shrilly,
You must believe me. Domhnall is there, seated there upon the very throne I won him, and then later inherited.
Father, calm thyself.
Padraig murmured, seeking to quiet his father as he saw the disillusionment growing on the face of Rory.
This is the man for which I cast down my honor and slew the Prince Rybert for.
Rory complained, motioning to the king, visibly disgusted.
Please, my lord, the High King holds you in the highest esteem, do you not, my dearest?
Aina said with false sweetness, attempting to reconcile the two men just as cracks appeared between them.
Certainly, if you would only cease these games and acknowledge the man sitting upon my throne,
Ringan said, persisting in his attempts to convince them of his sanity.
He who you once swore an oath of allegiance to as surely as you did to myself.
Father, control yourself.
Padraig hissed impatiently.
Nurok, have you sampled the wine of our father's cellar?
Duib asked as he was prompted forward by his stepmother, at the same time that the Tannist moved to intercede between Monarch and Mormaer.
My husband, you have brought enough embarrassment to us all. Therefore, cease this ridiculous demonstration of folly.
Aina growled at her husband, who turns now upon her.
Will you treat me so also?
The monarch demanded of her, unable to believe his ears as he threw up his hands in the air in disbelief at his ill fortune and the callous treatment of his family towards him.
I, who am High King?
It is because of your rank that we insist that you comport yourself with greater dignity than this.
The queen spat.
Your brother would not have comported himself in so foolish a matter, no matter how emotional and womanish he could prove himself to be.
My brother was weak. He was womanish and had neither the resolve to seize his throne nor to maintain the position upon it.
Ringan snapped at her, incensed by the proclamation that he was somehow found wanting in comparison to the brother he disdained so much. Pointing to the king, he added without thinking,
You ought to kneel at my feet and grovel as you were so prone to doing to all others in life. All that I did and all that I have done was for your greater good, Domhnall, and that is why I am king. And
here his voice died down as he saw a new expression come to decorate the face of the brother who had loved him so earnestly throughout the whole of his life. The hate that at present was directed against him was of a sort he had never seen before. Many were the men who had despised Ringan. Counted amongst those who despised him were his clan's enemies, to rebels against his throne, to his cousins, whom he had usurped, and finally to his nephews and nieces. All had looked at him with such open hatred sooner or later, it seemed. Yet never, in all his life, had he seen Domhnall The brother who had cherished him and always looked away from the slightest of his misdemeanors to the greatest of his crimes, looked on him in such a manner. The dark gaze of his brother, already shadowed due entirely to sorrow, became all the more clouded, though not with grief. Stunned to see his brother, who was so passive in life, adopt so furious a stare, was utterly unimaginable to him. It was more than he could bear. Nobody knew who reacted first at the sight of the frothing and thrashing monarch, whether it was Duib or Podrig or even the Queen. All knew only that the once proud warrior gave way to a fit of such madness as to frighten even the bravest of men, such as Norok and the many warriors in the mead hall. They knew only that Podrig soon ordered the doors sealed shut, and for someone to summon forth the king's physician and brother, Andrew. Not that Ringan heard any of this, still trembling and screeching madly as he fell into the arms of his sons. All he could see was the dark, burning eyes of the man who raised him.
The High King is in good health, near as I can tell.
Someone was saying when at last he regained consciousness.
What could have caused the fit?
Duib could be heard demanding of the first man from where he sat to his father's right.
Will there be another? Is there a spiritual cause?
In my experience, there is always a spiritual cause, my prince.
The first man whom Ringan now recognized as his physician, Brother Waltair, spoke. A learned man he had helped pay for the education of in faraway Kyranos, a continent away from the Isle of Bretwelda.
Brother Andrew, will you now intervene on his behalf?
I have tried, and yet there is little that I can do.
Also a learned man, if in theological matters, Andrew was a monk of the Abbey of Kilrimmen. The abbey in question was a shrine sacred to all Khalids, as the place where Khazantine had retired to after he had abdicated the throne.
What do you mean?
Duib queried, confused.
I mean only that, insofar as his health is concerned on the spiritual plane, I can detect nothing wrong with the king.
Andrew replied, never a man to speak loudly, yet at this moment there was a note of impatience that begun to enter his voice.
Where am I?
Ringan asked, confused, his mind discombobulated in spite of himself, so that even after having been awakened for several minutes.
In your bedchambers, father,
Duib informed him, seeking to pat him upon his shoulder without looking him in the eye.
You have been unconscious for several hours now.
This came as a shock to Ringan, who did not know what to make of it. Opening and closing his mouth in surprise, he was to glance toward the monks, who preferred to shrink back ever so slightly. Andrew was quiet, if disapproving, though that was hardly new, given that he had never approved of Ringan, so that it was rather more surprising that he was there at all. Moving to sit up, he was aided in this by Duib, who treated him with far greater care than the 40-year-old monarch might otherwise have liked under other circumstances. Irritated as he was, his bewilderment was to grow ever worse when he noticed the absence of Domhnall and when the door was thrown open.
At last you have awakened.
Buidich shouted, sweeping her way into the bedchambers of the king with an air of indignation to her, one that had never made her Ringan's favorite relative. At present, though, something in her gait and in the way she looked panicked left his disdain for her quite forgotten.
You must revoke Podrig's authority.
What has happened?
Ringan wondered, bewildered by her words. Ordinarily, she tended to get on quite well with her good brother, especially where Domhnall was concerned, as the two found his short-sighted nature and peculiar obsession with the temple he had diverted his personal fortune to in Athapla frustrating. The heiress of the small territory of Withwern to the west, renowned for her poise and her snobbery, trembled and shook with the force of her emotions. This was not entirely uncommon for her. What was that the emotions in question showed themselves to be not anger, but panic and mortal terror.
Nothing, father. You must rest.
Duib said, intervening at once, though there was a hint of worry in his voice. Wherefore it became angry as he directed his attention to his good sister.
Bowditch is simply letting her feminine weakness get the better of her. Pay her no mind.
How dare you? My sex has naught to do with this. Though were I aught else than a woman, I would soon reduce you to the state of a woman on account of your betrayal of my husband.
Bowditch shrieked, half mad with panic, as she threw herself against the half-risen king's knees, which had just been tossed over the side of the bed.
Please, O father, did not my father serve you faithfully and leally up to his death in the battle against Strathclyde? Has Domhnall not been leal as a Mormer? Has he not been pious son, one who has never betrayed or lied or otherwise shown himself to be untrue to you, his sire and father?
What has happened?
Ringan repeated, looking now to Duib, who did not meet his gaze again, but instead sought to pull Bowditch from the monarch.
Release him, sister. He has taken ill.
Unhand me!
Do as she says, you misbegotten fool!
Ringan shouted at his son in support of his good daughter, and when vocal objection failed him, he resorted to the last weapon he had, force. Never one to resist his father, Duib fell back stunned to have been struck. He might well have answered with outrage to such a blow, yet had little chance to. Quicker than he to answer, Bowditch, who though quite beside herself, ejaculated enough for him to understand better what it was that had her quite so desperate.
Padraig has commanded Domhnall. I know that he has ordered him, but I have no wish to lose my Domhnall.
She sobbed against his knees so that for the first time in years, Ringan felt something that vaguely resembled pity for someone. Bewildered, he was to turn to Duib once more, a hint of foreboding in the pit of his stomach as he asked of him,
What has happened?
Reluctantly, Duib told him what had happened.
Domhnall is to leave for the east to confront Kettle.
Ringan was gone in an instant.
The High King is in good health, near as I can tell.
Someone was saying when at last he regained consciousness.
What could have caused the fit?
Duib could be heard demanding of the first man from where he sat to his father's right.
Will there be another? Is there a spiritual cause?
In my experience, there is always a spiritual cause, my prince.
The first man whom Ringan now recognized as his physician, Brother Waltair, spoke. A learned man he had helped pay for the education of in faraway Kiranos, a continent away from the Isle of Bretwelda.
Brother Andrew, will you now intervene on his behalf?
I have tried, and yet there is little that I can do.
Also a learned man, if in theological matters, Andrew was a monk of the Abbey of Kilrimmen. The abbey in question was a shrine sacred to all Khalids, as the place where Cosantine had retired to after he had abdicated the throne.
What do you mean?
Duib queried, confused.
I mean only that, insofar as his health is concerned on the spiritual plane, I can detect nothing wrong with the king.
Andrew replied, never a man to speak loudly, yet at this moment there was a note of impatience that had begun to enter his voice.
Where am I?
Ringan asked, confused, his mind discombobulated in spite of himself, so that even after having been awakened for several minutes.
In your bedchambers, father,
Duib informed him, seeking to pat him upon his shoulder without looking him in the eye.
You have been unconscious for several hours now.
This came as a shock to Ringan, who did not know what to make of it. Opening and closing his mouth in surprise, he was to glance toward the monks, who preferred to shrink back ever so slightly. Andrew was quiet, if disapproving, though that was hardly new, given that he had never approved of Ringan, so that it was rather more surprising that he was there at all. Moving to sit up, he was aided in this by Duib, who treated him with far greater care than the 40-year-old monarch might otherwise have liked under other circumstances. Irritated as he was, his bewilderment was to grow ever worse when he noticed the absence of Domhnall and when the door was thrown open.
At last you have awakened. weakened.
Buidich shouted, sweeping her way into the bedchambers of the king with an air of indignation to her, one that had never made her Ringan's favorite relative. At present, though, something in her gait and in the way she looked panicked left his disdain for her quite forgotten.
You must revoke Podreg's authority.
What has happened?
Ringan wondered, bewildered by her words. Ordinarily, she tended to get on quite well with her good brother, especially where Domnall was concerned, as the two found his short-sighted nature and peculiar obsession with the temple he had diverted his personal fortune to in Athopla frustrating. The heiress of the small territory of Withwern to the west, renowned for her poise and her snobbery, trembled and shook with the force of her emotions. This was not entirely uncommon for her. What was that the emotions in question showed themselves to be not anger, but panic and mortal terror.
Nothing, father. You must rest.
Duib said, intervening at once, though there was a hint of worry in his voice. Wherefore it became angry as he directed his attention to his good sister.
Bowditch is simply letting her feminine weakness get the better of her. Pay her no mind.
How dare you? My sex has naught to do with this. Though were I aught else than a woman, I would soon reduce you to the state of a woman on account of your betrayal of my husband.
Buidich shrieked, half mad with panic, as she threw herself against the half-risen king's knees, which had just been tossed over the side of the bed.
Please, O father, did not my father serve you faithfully and leally up to his death in the battle against Strathclad? Has Domnall not been leal as a Mormer? Has he not been pious son, one who has never betrayed or lied or otherwise shown himself to be untrue to you, his sire and father?
What has happened?
Ringan repeated, looking now to Duib, who did not meet his gaze again, but instead sought to pull Buidich from the monarch.
Release him, sister. He has taken ill.
Unhand me!
Do as she says, you misbegotten fool!
Ringan shouted at his son in support of his good daughter, and when vocal objection failed him, he resorted to the last weapon he had, force. Never one to resist his father, Duib fell back stunned to have been struck. He might well have answered with outrage to such a blow, yet had little chance to. Quicker than he to answer, Buidich, who though quite beside herself, ejaculated enough for him to understand better what it was that had her quite so desperate.
Podreg has commanded Domnall. I know that he has ordered him, but I have no wish to lose my Domnall.
She sobbed against his knees so that for the first time in years, Ringan felt something that vaguely resembled pity for someone. Bewildered, he was to turn to Duib once more, a hint of foreboding in the pit of his stomach as he asked of him,
What has happened?
Reluctantly, Duib told him what had happened.
Domnall is to leave for the east to confront Kettle.
Ringan was gone in an instant. It was shortly after the news that Duib had slain his old friend, the Mormaer of Fortriu, in the man's own castle of Fittich, that there was to be the worst of the news. Achaeus, son of Mile Martin, had broken through Fortriu, arriving with a Brittian army of sellswords, thousands of arms sent from Eriu to assist him, and the aid of several of the Marcher lairds and Mormaers. Achaeus had defeated Duib. A dozen days after the defeat, winded and wounded, Duib was to present himself before his father, telling him,
We must prepare to fly into exile, or at least west into Luthane, father. Podreg may have been captured, but we still have hope if his steward left with the children has indeed repelled the advance of our enemies.
What?
Currently wrapped in 3 bear fur blankets and before a fire in the chimney in his room, Ringan, whose teeth had been chattering before the arrival of his son, was shocked.
What is this about Podreg's men defeating the rebels, and why are you come hither?
Achaeus has been proclaimed High King by all in the south. We must go west,
Duib retorted desperately. Quiet and ice cold, Ringan, thinking as rapidly as he could, was to glance at his guards and slowly nod shallowly.
See through the preparations. Tell me only one thing, my son. How far behind you is the enemy?
At this question, Duib grew sheepish, swallowed several times, and admitted,
3 days.
3 days? What have you been doing all this time? Even Domhnall would have had the sense not to tarry.
Ringan howled furiously, throwing his fur cloaks from his shoulders and standing tall to his full 6 feet and 4 inches height.
I will see to the details. No need to worry.
There is plenty of reason to worry. Go inform Aina and have her see to the details.
There is plenty of reason to worry. Go inform Aina. Have her see to the details while you see to that wound in thy shoulders.
Ringan snapped impatiently, pleased that this son at the least was to heed his orders, as he was too weakened himself to do otherwise.
Oh, indeed. If I hear that you have stopped by the tavern or grabbed something to drink, I will have you whipped as I once did when you were a child.
Preparations were made and orders dispatched in secret. The city walls were to be provisioned with guards, the gates shut, and provisions taken in. The city was to prepare itself for siege, and the royal line was to flee west. The trouble Ringan found out was that Aina hated the decision. Sending a messenger to report to him, she had no desire to leave for the west. As she hated Luthane and refused to be anything less than queen, she had barricaded herself in her own chambers.
Inform the queen that she will do as she is told, unless she would prefer to be abandoned here.
Ringan was to snap impatiently, to the approval of his good daughter and Duib. It was after this that Aina, for the first time in weeks, presented herself before him, begging and supplicating with him that they should not go west. Ringan told her frankly.
The lairds here are not reliable, unlike most of those in Luthane who, once they swear an oath, keep to it. The truth is also that Arceus is a wastrel and a glutton, one who had been rejected and chased from house to house in Britia during his sojourn there. Most despise him once they come to know him. Therefore, we need only to go west and wait for the people and mourners to grow weary of him, unseat him, and come begging to us in the west.
But I do not like the Isles and the coastal region there.
You will do as you are told.
Ringan snapped at her wearily.
Why must we fight?
Aina asked, shifting tactics as she blinked her eyes in the most feminine manner imaginable. Desperate not to go, she was to command the guards to leave, with Ringan irritated when they heeded her orders rather than his own. Not that he soon minded, as for the first time in some time, he was to enjoy his wife. Somehow he was able to enjoy his time with her, in spite of the haunting figures all around him. Afterwards, as they lay in bed, as the suns descended, his prior clammy coldness forgotten, he whispered to her,
"Fear not, lass. Fear not, the west is not so bad. There is salmon aplenty, and sheep. Oh, ye have not tasted a flavor so tender as the meat of that land."
As he drifted off to sleep, he hardly noticed the way in which his wife studied him. Gone was the affection of old, and gone was the admiration she once held for him. He also did not notice her grab the pillow under her own head and move towards him. The death of Ringan unraveled the efforts to create a worthy enough defense against the forces of Arceus. Ordering the opening of the gates to them, Aina was to order that Duib be seized and handed over to the enemy, along with Buidich. Buidich was to disguise herself as a maid, then, upon reuniting with her husband, who had fled after his defeat, flee across the waves by boat, paying for it with some of the gold she had seized during her escape. As to Duib, horrified by the loss of his beloved father, he fled west as he had said he would, only to be separated from his guards by a strange fog that rolled down from the northeast. But as for Aina, when at last she was presented before Arceus and had convinced him of her importance, and he, taken in by her beauty, had taken her to bed, she was to count herself fortunate, in the dead of night, to have rid herself of her pitiable husband. It was as she turned her gaze away from her newest conquest that she was made to suck in a breath as Ringan's dark gaze met her own. "Long stride, O long stride," cried the poets. "Wicked was he that all knew his name, even the lowest. Terror wert all filled by, and upon terror he throve. Against his own kingly brother he strove. As a flame, the wolf moon laird tore the Khalids apart, that all whispered he had not a heart. Crimson was the Tairn, when he tore thousands from their hearths, to feed the waters, blade in hand, from the South Ron to North Ron lands. He hewed all, until his song spread to all lands. The gnawing beast he fed, nary a thought to the Khalids. O Longstride, why have ye bled the realm and sent her sons to be fed to the gnawing devourer of their blood red? All who had heard tell or read of thy tale hath said, O Longstride, king of dread, why hast thou spread to all corners of the realm such dread? The halls of all the women of the Khalids are filled by lamentation, as their men hath bled and bled, bled thus, hath the poet said, and said once more, O Longstride, king of dread, why must thou spread such misery? Why hast thou misled the sons of the Khalids? Oh, how the women do so weep. Away, away went their sons to their demise. Their sorrow did run so deep. Ne'er again did the sons rise so high. Ne'er again the harvest they reaped. Why, oh why, did Domnall the Wise allow him to rise, to take the Khalid throne and bleed the whole of the realm? Why must we weep, when it ought to have been he who did so reap such sorrow that men may drown in the sea deep? O Longstride, without mercy, why devise such cruelties as to heap sorrow upon sorrow for all with eyes? To see the savagery on thy enemies thou hast heaped. Long was the scarlet cloak cast o'er morning lands, once lush and green, that did once evoke lusty eyes and joyful cries and busy hands. Such was the fate cast upon the lowlands. Aside the hilly crown was cast, where once it shined, those times were banned by crimson skies aghast at the towering highlands. Dark was the shadows cast o'er Caledonia's spinelands, the dusk o'er White Isles, vast as the deepest sea of beauty unsurpassed. Though this beauty now be banned, lo, thus sings the bards, lo, this be the curse cast on us by Ringan, who cast the Roman shadows, shadows deep cast also by the sons of Ringan. O Longstride, who the gods didst allow unto the fabled throne that oughtn't hath gone to Ringan, he who heaped untold pain unto his fraternal shadow. O Domnall of 1,000 sorrows, what justice didst Aina bring down upon Ringan ere madness gripped her, as the pall was cast o'er her by his shadow?